I'm Neo. Welcome into the skeptic arena. Matt Slick operates the website carm.org, which stands for Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, where he has posted an argument which claims that the logical absolutes are proof for the existence of God. This argument is known as TAG, which is short for Transcendental Argument for the Existence of God. Matt Slick challenges any atheist to refute his argument and claims that no one has ever successfully done so. I emailed Matt Slick, informing him that I would like to accept his challenge to debate TAG. After several emails went unanswered, I finally got him to reply by CCing several well-known Christians, including Billy Graham and Rick Warren. Matt Slick and I then exchanged a series of emails in which he did everything humanly possible to avoid the debate. To save face, he even offered to fly out and debate at his own expense. Yet when I told him he could save a ton of money and a lot of time by simply calling into my show from the comfort of his own home for free, he ignored my offer. He then sent me one final email in which he said that he would only debate if treated politely and allowed to speak uninterrupted. I agreed to his every request. His reply? Dead silence. I had wanted to make an interesting video of the debate, but it takes two to tango, and I'm out here on the dance floor all alone. So I've decided to provide this video containing my replies to Matt Slick's Transcendental Argument for the Existence of God. The three logical absolutes were presented first by Aristotle. They are: 1. The law of identity. For example, a rock is a rock. Number 2. The law of non-contradiction. Example, a rock cannot be both a rock and not a rock at the same time. This makes the law of identity exclusive. And 3, the law of excluded middle. Only one of two contradictory propositions can be true. This makes the law of identity exhaustive. Now for the debate. Matt wrote, "Logical absolutes are conceptual by nature." And Matt Slick then went on to explain that reality is either physical or conceptual. Matt, by attempting to divide reality into physical and conceptual, you have created a false dichotomy. There is no evidence for a dichotomy of reality. Everything that exists is either physical or dependent upon the physical universe, including the absolutes. Concepts are produced by the mind, which itself is an emergent property of the brain. Concepts are dependent upon a brain for their very existence, and therefore are very much a part of the physical universe. Logical absolutes, on the other hand, are attributes of the universe. They are not dependent on any mind, as they existed long before there were any minds. Why are the absolutes what they are? Because they couldn't be anything else. How could a rock not be a rock? You assert that they require an author, and you reject that the absolutes simply exist as an inherent essence of the universe, because that contradicts the premise upon which you wish to build your argument. Now I will present evidence that you are creating a false dichotomy when you arbitrarily divide reality into physical and conceptual. First, many cognitive functions, including information transfer, memory, motor control, and perception, things which you consider part of the conceptual realm, have all been linked to neural oscillations in the brain. To exist in the physical world, you require that things be measurable. Well, brain waves are measurable. They can be measured by frequency, by amplitude, and by phase. Examples include beta waves, which are involved in active concentration, delta waves in deep sleep, and theta waves, which are linked to the memory function. Next, neuroscientists can pinpoint where in the brain these waves originate. And oxytocin is a hormone which contributes to emotional love in the brain in various ways that can be measured. The conceptual world that you imagine is quite real and measurable. You wrote, if the logical absolutes were properties of the universe, then they could be measured the same way heat, motion, mass, etc. are measured. Since they cannot be measured, they are not properties of the universe. You have tried to impose limits on the way the absolutes can be measured. The absolutes can be measured by logical truth statements. For example, if x does in fact equal x, then the first law is measured as true. You wrote, but if the universe did not exist, logical absolutes are still true. Then explain how a rock can be a rock in a non-existent universe. In a non-existent universe, there would be nothing for the law of identity to be applied to. Therefore, the absolutes could not exist. You wrote, logical absolutes are not the product of the physical universe, since that would mean they were contingent on atoms. When do you think atoms first formed? Atoms didn't form until almost 380,000 years after the Big Bang, so the absolutes were never contingent upon atoms. And if you try to move the goalposts back to when atomic nuclei first formed, your attempt will still fail, because nucleosynthesis began almost 3 minutes after the Big Bang and lasted nearly 20 minutes. Before that, the universe was a quark-gluon plasma. Since this soup was matter, the absolutes had to exist. A quark was a quark, and a quark was not a quark. The absolutes have existed ever since the first moment that there was something in the universe to which the law of identity could be applied to. You said a statement is either true or false, without a middle ground. Your claim is only true in a bivalent logic system, but the principle of bivalence is a property that semantics may or may not have. The principle does not overrule the absolutes. Outside of a bivalent logic system, the negation of true is not false. The negation of true is not true. False is merely a subset of not true. One example of a value that is neither true nor false is null. You said it must be an absolute transcendent mind that is authoring them. This mind is called God. Let me say that one more time. It must be an absolute transcendent mind that is authoring them. This mind is called God. Tell me if you recognize this.
God did not author the logical absolutes.
One more time.
God did not author the logical absolutes.
That's not a logical fallacy. That's just a plain and simple contradiction. When your left brain quits fighting with your right brain, perhaps you could tell us which it is. If anything, evidence would point to the Big Bang as the author of the absolutes, since they could not have existed before it and have existed ever since it occurred. You wrote, since the logical absolutes are transcendent, absolute, are perfectly consistent, and are independent of the universe, then it seems proper to say that they reflect a transcendent, absolute, perfect, and independent mind. We call this transcendent, absolute, perfect, and independent mind God. Since you haven't proven that the absolutes are independent of the universe, nor have you proven that they reflect a perfect mind, it doesn't really matter what you call it. A commenter at your website stated, "Logical absolutes simply exist," to which you replied, "This is begging the question," by saying they exist because they exist, and does not provide an explanation for their existence. Simply saying they exist is not an answer. And yet you had no problem using that same excuse. So begging the question is okay when you do it. Maybe you'll remember this.
The logical absolutes, they are, what we would say, they are part of his nature and his essence.
Let's hear that one more time.
The logical absolutes, they are, what we would say, they are part of his nature and his essence.
See what I mean? You deny to others the same argument that you allow for yourself. That is logically inconsistent. You wrote, "How is it logical absolutes could exist without a mind? After all, logic is a process of the mind." It's true that logic is a process of the mind, but the absolutes are not. Before there were any minds in the universe, a rock was still a rock. You wrote, "How can an atheist logically claim that one chemical state in the brain, which leads to another state, necessitates proper logical inference?" An atheist has nothing to do with any of that. An atheist is simply someone who thinks that your beliefs are full of crap. You wrote, "Therefore, logical absolutes, which are not contradictory, cannot be the product of minds that are contradictory." Your claim implies that imperfect minds are incapable of producing non-contradictory things. I can think of a lot of examples to prove you wrong, but I'll just give you one. Logic. Now we come to your conclusion, which in true false dichotomy style you have titled "Only Two Options." If we have only two possible options by which we can explain something, and one of those options is removed, by default the other option is verified, since it is impossible to negate both of the only two exist options. We only have evidence for one option, so by your own reasoning, you lose. You wrote, "God either exists or does not exist. There is no third option." Actually, there are thousands of other options. So even if you could prove that God exists, you would still have to prove that of all the possible spookies out there, he's your spooky. You wrote, "If the no-God position, atheism, clearly fails to account for logical absolutes from its perspective, then it is negated and the other option is verified. Atheism cannot account for the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, namely the existence of the logical absolutes." The precondition for intelligibility does not come from the absolutes. It comes from biology. That precondition is a brain. Atheism is nothing but the rejection of God, and therefore has nothing to do with the logical absolutes. So the third option, invisible ghost, is not verified. You wrote, therefore it is invalidated as a viable option for accounting for the absolutes, and the only other option, God exists, is validated. Only in your dreams, ghost boy. Your tag argument is so full of holes you could strain cheese through it. Millions of Christians accept science, are tolerant of others with whom they disagree, and strongly support the separation of church and state. Unfortunately, there are also millions of other fundamentalist Christians who do great damage to our nation. They actually worship ignorance. If they were fish, most of them would die of thirst. Now I'll end with this tribute to the Transcendental Argument for the existence of God.